it's not only music that is symbolic of a kind of special harmony between humankind and nature. It can also be magic. When we think of magic nowadays, setting aside the conjuring tricks of entertainment, we perhaps immediately think of black magic, the idea of a witch, a wizard, in touch with the forces of evil. But in Shakespeare's time, there was a belief that there was both black magic and white magic. That yes, people did believe in witches, in the possibility that one might conjure up a devil, as Dr. Faustus does in Christopher Marlowe's famous play. But they also believed in the possibility of a kind of philosophic magic, a good magic, a white magic, in which a great human mind works in conjunction with the forces of nature in order to bring about good. And this is very much how Prospero conceives of himself. We learn early in the play that while he is Duke of Milan, Prospero has spent a great deal of time in his library studying books of magic. In many ways that sounds very like Dr. Faustus, but whereas Dr. Faustus is led in this very dark direction, Prospero learns to use magic for harmonious effects. So it is that the play begins with a storm that is not entirely natural, because Prospero has conjured it up. He tells us he has the power with his magic book and his magic staff and his magic circle, the power to create a storm, to calm a storm. And at various points in the play, we also see him engaging in his magic. We hear talk of how he has imprisoned both Ariel and Caliban, freed Ariel from the tree, imprisoned Caliban in the rock, and we see him causing a kind of freeze frame effect when some of the people who are plotting against him are literally, through the magical agency of Prospero working with Ariel, trapped in a lime grove. But at the end of the play, Prospero renounces his magic. He comes to see that he's been using his magic to carry out revenge on his enemies, but in the end it will be more important to confront them humanly, to forgive them. Fascinatingly, it's not another human being who teaches him the importance of humane forgiveness, but Ariel, the spirit. Canst thou, he says to Ariel, which art but air, can you, a spirit, have a sense of sympathy for their suffering? If you feel like that, he says, then I too must feel like that. I must forgive rather than revenge, and I must renounce my desire for power, renounce my magic. And then he says, but this rough magic I here abjure. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses, that this airy charm is for, there's the music that comes along with the magic. When I have done that, he says, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. By the end of the play, Prospero is nakedly himself. He's no longer relying on the forces of magic. It's a wonderfully powerful image. Inevitably, we find ourselves asking the question as to whether the original audience of the play really believed there could be a man like Prospero who had a kind of magical power, an ability to use supernatural wisdom as a way of unlocking the forces of nature, conjuring up storms and so forth. Well, who knows what every individual member of the audience thought, but it certainly was the case that there were one or two people in Shakespeare's England and Shakespeare's Europe who had reputations as great magicians. Possibly the most famous of them was called John Dee. He initially was effectively astrologer to Queen Elizabeth. Subsequently, he also worked for Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor. He was a figure known throughout Europe for his great wisdom, his amazing library, his books, and his almost magical powers. Here's an engraving of him, and you see he holds a pair of compasses and a globe. He looks exactly as we would imagine Prospero, the long beard, a cloak that perhaps suggests a magician's cloak. And the globe reminds us how The Tempest is a global play, a play about travel and geography. The inscription on the engraving describes Dee as Mathematicus Anglorum Celeberimus, most celebrated English mathematician. Music, mathematics, magic were thought of as being very closely related. There were quasi-magical mathematical patterns in music, in the harmony of the spheres. Dee's great command of music and mathematics was also put to practical effect. He wrote a very important treatise on navigation. He wrote another treatise on reforming the calendar, all to do with numbers. His treatise on navigation, and indeed his translation of one of the great Greek classical mathematical texts, Euclid's Mathematics, included prefaces where he spoke about the possibility of the English, through their great knowledge of nature, establishing an empire. The phrase British Empire possibly had its origin in one of these treatises by John Dee. Now, I'm not suggesting that Prospero is in any direct or literal sense a stage version of John Dee. But what I do very strongly suggest is that Dee was a celebrity, a well-known figure. People knew about his extraordinary mental powers. They knew about these links between magic, navigation, exploration, power, and that the play, The Tempest, is engaging with that whole very exciting set of discourses. So Dee is there in Shakespeare's world, in the background of the play, as an analogy for Prospero. He helps us to understand that Prospero's magic, Prospero's white magic, is genuinely taken seriously by Shakespeare's audience. But at the same time, Shakespeare, who always sees both sides of a question, breaks down that easy distinction between black magic and white. Prospero constantly opposes his magic to that of Caliban's mother, the so-called witch Sycorax, who was exiled to the island before Prospero was, who gave birth to Caliban there and who then died. Prospero speaks of Sycorax's black magic, of her evil. But Sycorax and Prospero in some ways have the same powers. And fascinatingly, when Prospero gives his great speech about abjuring his rough magic, some of the words that he uses, speaking about his magical powers, his powers of conjuring up storms and so forth, are actually translated out of that book, Ovid's Metamorphoses, which Shakespeare was so influenced by throughout his career, as we've seen at several points throughout our course. Who is it who speaks the lines about magical powers that Prospero translates? Not a white magician, but a black one. Not a man of power like John Dee, but someone denominated, branded, a witch, a female. It was the figure Medea in the classical story of Jason and Medea that those words were taken. So by using the words of Medea, a witch figure, Prospero is in some way being elided by Shakespeare with his great opposite, Sycorax. Our judgment of Prospero is a matter for debate, for discussion. For some, he's a benign figure. For others, there is an element of malignity even about him. And maybe he comes to realise that himself when at the end of the play he accepts that in some ways Caliban's wickedness has been created by him, by Prospero. This thing of darkness, he says, with regard to Caliban. I acknowledge mine.